The Man with the Yin-Yang Eyes. Season 3. Episode 7. After letting out a fierce roar, both strangers charged at us. Facing me now was a man shaped like a gorilla. He lunged at me at a dizzying speed. When he was still a few feet away from me, the man jumped up. I guess he wanted to use his huge body to crush me. Facing an opponent with such great power, I did not dare to be negligent and directly blocked his attack. Aiming at the right moment, I dodged to the side to avoid the gorilla's dangerous attack. But at that moment, I realized that I was not the main target of this gorilla. After passing me easily, the gorilla leapt forward to the hospital bed Anthony was lying on. It turned out that his main target was Anthony, but even if I ran to stop him right now, it would be too late. Seeing the gorilla rush towards both father and son, Anthony panicked. If it's normal, then Anthony can handle him. But right now, it's not possible. While not knowing what to do to rescue Anthony in time, I suddenly remembered the battle with Anthony before. I understood that normal fighting wouldn't work against a mind-controlled person like the gorilla right now. So without further hesitation, I immediately raised my hand and made seals. After I finished the chant, I threw the magic seal in my hand at the gorilla's back. My attack arrived just in time to stop the gorilla. Just a little more delay, and he crushed Anthony lying on the hospital bed. Almost immediately after being hit, the gorilla's soul escaped from the man's body. Only I have seen this, so I know normal people can't see it at all. After the gorilla's soul left his body, the man lost all control over himself. He was like a sack of potatoes falling on Anthony. Although he succeeded in rescuing Anthony from the gorilla's attack, it seemed that his massive body fell on him, making Anthony uncomfortable. Seeing that the gorilla was no longer dangerous, I turned my gaze to Valentine. Valentine's opponent is the woman who carries the spirit of the leopard. At this point, the battle between the two was extremely fierce, even though it had only just begun. This time it must be said that Valentine has met an opponent worthy of her, both in strength and speed. The two did not seem to lose to each other even a little. Realizing that it's not a good idea to keep fighting with an opponent like that, Valentine threw a kick that repelled the enemy. Simultaneously, she stepped back and took out the gun she was carrying. She decided that if the girl continued to attack, she would open fire to suppress it. At the same time, I reached behind Valentine's back. My hands had completed the seal. I immediately directed it towards Valentine's opponent. Despite seeing Valentine pointing a gun at her, the girl with the leopard spirit showed no fear. She was still rushing towards Valentine. Seeing that, without waiting for Valentine to fire, I launched the magic seal in my hand towards her. Suddenly seeing her opponent seem to be stopped by an invisible force. At the same time, Valentine also felt like something had just grazed her head. Valentine turned her head and looked at me with surprised eyes. After the animal's spirit controlling the being was expelled, both the man and the woman lost consciousness. Their condition is identical to Anthony's. They have absolutely no memory of what they did after regaining consciousness. When they found themselves in the hospital, both were confused, especially for the girl. She was quite panicked because Valentine was pointing a gun at her. With the situation under control, Valentine began to question the two. But Valentine's response was both bewildered expressions along with head shakes. The man and the girl say they don't remember anything at all. They don't even know how they got here. At those answers, Valentine began to feel annoyed. The only thing that both of them remember is that they were in the military. They are still active now and are serving in the army. Both also said that they were recruited to participate in a secret military training program for super soldiers. In addition to the above information, the the two adamantly did not say anything more. At the answer of these two, Big D couldn't hold it anymore. He rushed in front of them and shouted, "If you are wise, quickly tell me who sent you here. Is your purpose in coming here to kill people with clues?" Although the words are somewhat hot-tempered, Big D's thoughts are completely right. I also think that, after learning that Anthony was awake, someone was afraid that he would reveal information, so they sent these two people to kill him. At Big D's question, the other two just shook their heads. They once again asserted that they did not remember anything at all. This is completely understandable since when they were brought here to kill Anthony, it had been a while since their souls had been controlled. Despite knowing that, Big D was still extremely angry. He continued to raise his voice for more. Moments later, more police officers arrived at Valentine's request for assistance. She decided to take these two people to the police station to testify, but she was not very optimistic. She said, "These people are military anyway. I can only quickly get information from them before the army comes to claim them. Don't expect to know anything more, so you won't be disappointed." Realizing that Valentine no longer refused to settle this matter, Big D immediately spoke up. "Valentine, you are the legal representative anyway. As long as you do your duty properly, I believe the case will be cleared up." Hearing that, Valentine immediately replied to Big D, "I already told you, don't expect too much from me. I know this involves the safety of many people and society, but I can only do what I can." Before leaving, Valentine added that the police would be bound by many things, but neither of us. She thought that if we did our own investigation, we might find something. Hearing that, Big D immediately said, "Come on, you can't let us take care of your business. We are not the police. How can we investigate when your police are not sure they can do it?" Big D just finished talking. Valentine turned around. She said to Big D, "Didn't you still scream earlier to find out who was behind this? It's time for you to fight for justice." Then Valentine turned and pointed at me and said, "Is that right, Gregory? Fight for heart and justice." After finishing her words, Valentine turned and left the hospital room, leaving me and Big D. At this time, Big D was still dumbfounded. He muttered, Justice is worth a pound of money, isn't it?" But then Big D suddenly remembered Valentine's second sentence. He turned to look at me with eyes that were not friendly at all. Big D said, "Hey kid, what was Valentine's attitude towards you? What is fighting for the heart? She even smiles at you. I warned you, becoming my love rival won't end well." Realizing that Big D was jealous, I spoke up and changed the subject. I said, "Come on, don't be so selfish, she's not yours. What do you think about this? Where should we start investigating?" Seemingly still in a rage, Big D replied to me, "Look what the hero of justice is saying. You asked for an investigation. Why are you asking me? You're so smart." Knowing that Big D is really sulking, I stopped teasing him. I started thinking about everything that just happened. I don't have a clue in my hand right now. All the witnesses we have so far don't remember anything. They only remember the secret base, they don't know where it is. At this moment, a thought flashed through my head. I left Big D and slowly walked out. Seeing me walk away, Big D knew that I had come up with something. He immediately said goodbye to Tony. Big D told him to use the best services to care for his son. "If you're having trouble with money, just contact me." After waving goodbye, Big D ran out the door to chase me. After catching up with me, Big D still didn't speak. He waited for me to tell him my thoughts. As for me, after thinking a lot, I think that to put the souls of animals into the human body, the basic thing is to have those animals first. And this can't be done easily in a big city like this. I immediately asked Big D, "Do you know any wildlife dealers in this city?" Big D still didn't understand. He asked me again, "Why are you asking me this? You can see the animals in the zoo. There's no need to look for smugglers?" I laughed and said to Big D, "What I am looking for are real wild animals, not useless animals in the zoo. And most importantly, they must be alive. Did you understand what I mean?" At this point, it seems that Big D has understood what I mean. He let out a loud cry and said, "You're so good, I get it. To have really strong animals, they have to catch wild animals. Of course, the military cannot buy them openly, only through smugglers. About those who do not need to pay taxes, Big D knows a lot." Big D said he would take me to meet someone like that. In the car, Big D told me briefly about these wildlife smugglers. According to Big D, as long as they have money, customers can provide whatever they want. Small wild animals include weasels and leopards. Larger wild animals, such as tigers, lions. Even if the customer is willing to pay, even an elephant they can bring back to them. Big D also added that the hobbies of people with a lot of money are really strange. Sometimes ordinary people will never understand. That's why smugglers can survive. Suddenly Big D reached out his hand to me and said, "If you go to meet them like this, you'll be exposed. You don't look like someone with money at all." Then Big D drove down to the garage of a large building. As soon as he stopped the car, he forced me to take off my clothes. Then Big D went to the back of the car, took out a set of clothes, and told me to put them on. He explained, "Don't look down on these clothes. Looking at you now, you have the appearance of a boss who has just appeared. This is the kind of customer that smugglers really like." Next, Big D taught me some ways to communicate when talking to smugglers. This seems important because if we do not gain their trust and agree to the transaction, our lives may be threatened. Finally, Big D said to me, "I'll introduce you to a young man who just got rich from the stock market. You came here to get some spectacular pets for your garden." After trying for a while, I was able to fit my body into Big D's suit. I don't know when was the last time he brought this garment to the laundromat, but now it has a terrible smell. I got dressed while nagging Big D about his filth. Not to mention Big D gave me a lot of rings and a watch. Although they are made quite delicately, I know for sure that they are all fake. To my grumbling words, Big D replied, "Well, stop nagging. The outfit you are wearing is not ordinary, it shows the level of a true player. From now on, you don't talk much, let me handle everything." After nodding in understanding, Big D started to lead me away. Moments later, I was taken to a door that was guarded by someone outside. After approaching the door, Big D showed his familiar smile to greet the security guard. Big D said that he came here to meet the boss to discuss business. Faced with Big D's cheerful attitude, the security guard was still extremely cold. He pulled out his walkie-talkie and called inside to let him know that someone was looking for the boss. After that, I couldn't hear what was said inside. Only the security guard pointed his finger upwards as if he wanted Big D to look in that direction. It turned out that in the corner of the wall, there was also a security surveillance camera. The security guard wanted me and Big D to look into the camera lens so the people inside could identify both of us. It seems that these smugglers work extremely methodically and are very vigilant. As long as the person looking for them shows suspicious signs or is not an acquaintance, they will immediately find an excuse to chase them away. Big D immediately turned to the camera and smiled. He even waved his hand like greeting an old friend. As for me, I followed what Big D told me, always keeping a cold attitude of a rich man. After confirming Big D's identity, the door opened. Big D immediately pushed me in. Before leaving, he did not forget to turn back to thank the security guard. As soon as I walked through the door a few steps, a stench hit my nose. It was the smell of wild animals and rotting flesh. It's not too intense, but it makes me feel uncomfortable. Walking a few more steps, I noticed these odors emanating from the iron cages placed close to both sides of the corridor. Looks like Big D has been here before, so he didn't show any discomfort with the smell. Going a little further, we came to an extremely solid iron door. There is also a security guard standing at the door, but this guy is also armed with a gun, unlike outside. Looking at the security guard, I guess that his purpose here doesn't seem to be to prevent people from entering, but rather to prevent what's inside from escaping. As soon as we walked through the second door, we reached a large warehouse. What was presented in front of my eyes could not help but surprise me. On the floor of the warehouse are many iron cages. In each cage is a caged animal. Among those cages were extremely ferocious and dangerous beasts, and as soon as they saw us, they rushed out as if they wanted to bite us. I pay special attention to dangerous carnivores. These animals kept screaming horrible noises as we passed their cages. Perhaps because they were locked up for a long time, they were extremely excited when they saw humans. For their size and ferocity, I think if they got out, we would be slaughtered immediately. When a lion roared and rushed towards me, I startled and grabbed Big D's shoulder. Big D laughed and said to me, "Come on, this isn't the first time you've seen such dangerous animals. Your attitude right now is that if you want to buy some of them to put in the garden, only ghosts will believe you." Hearing what Big D said, I realized he was absolutely right. I regained my composure and regained my cold expression like before. Moments later, 3 men appeared in front of me. From the way they dress, I can tell that the person in the lead is the boss here. The man immediately approached and raised his hand to greet Big D. Big D also happily greeted him. The two seem to have known each other before, and they have not only met once. It seems that Valentine's threat about the tax evasion business with Big D is not without foundation. So far, I still have a bit of a dislike about Big D's ostentatious dressing, but when I met this wildlife dealer, I realized that Big D is still quite modest. Although it was quite hot, he still wore a large fur coat, looking like a malnourished bear. The most noticeable point is his gold teeth, which look ridiculous. After exchanging a few more polite words, Big D approached the merchant. The two happily put their arms around each other and walked away from me a little, as if they wanted to talk privately. The merchant immediately inquired about my background and my purpose in coming here. Big D immediately replied to him, "Today, I brought you a rich guy. He's a naive player who just made his fortune in the stock market. He's looking for something to decorate the manor he just bought in the suburbs." After exchanging a few more words with Big D, the merchant came back to me. "Okay, young man, what do you want in the end? Since I am an acquaintance of Master King, I will charge you a fair price, just say your request." At the same time, Big D kept gesturing at me as if he wanted me to answer carefully. Because just being discovered, there's a good chance that Big D and I will become lunch for the animals here. I've never been in contact with smugglers like this before, so I'm quite confused. Looking around, I didn't have any snakes, so I told him I like snakes, really big ones. My attitude right now is a bit unnatural. But it was quite reasonable for a novice to play, so the merchant had no doubts. At my request, the merchant was quite surprised. He asked me, "Do you really like snakes? You are quite special, young man. Do you have any special interest in them?" This question from the merchant seemed to be probing me. I immediately made up some of my hobbies with snakes and didn't forget to talk about my knowledge about them. After a while, the merchant also began to believe that I really liked snakes. As if to confirm my interest in snakes, I added to the merchant, "Snakes are not only kept for decoration, but they can also be used to make food. Believe me, their taste is not bad at all. Have you tried them before?" The merchant showed great surprise. He did not expect his guest today to be so special. To make what I just said more convincing, I immediately named some dishes made from snake meat and their taste. At what I just said, Big D suddenly turned pale. He didn't expect me to use this way to respond to the merchant. Everything seemed to have deviated from his pre-calculation. After hearing what I said, the merchant burst into laughter at Big D's astonishment. He said that I was indeed an interesting client that he had never met. After he finished laughing, he turned to me and said, "Okay, no problem. As long as the customer asks, I can get you as few as you want. Now, besides snakes, are you interested in anything else?" Then the merchant put my arm around my shoulders and took me around the iron cages in the warehouse. He asked me if I wanted to buy one of them. He said that, in addition to the animals here, he also provides other species. As long as customers pay for it, he can confidently earn it no matter how rare it is. At the merchant's cheerful attitude, I asked about the leopards and wolves. As soon as I asked about this animal, the smile on the merchant's lips disappeared. He said that these animals are currently out of stock. You must pre-order them if you want to have them. He seemed to have noticed something in my question and started to be wary. At the merchant's attitude, I laughed and put my arm around his shoulder and said, "It's okay, I can wait. Money doesn't matter to me. To tell you the truth, besides snakes, I'm also quite interested in wolves and cheetahs. I've seen Arab players raise cheetahs like cats." After I finished speaking, I stopped, but the merchant continued to walk forward. Seeing that, Big D immediately came to my side and whispered to me. He told me to take it easy, don't ask him so suddenly. Big D also added that when he heard the leopard and the wolf, the two guys in the back also started paying attention to both of us. Before Big D's anxiety, I immediately went back to reassure him. I said, "Don't worry, it will be okay. We don't have much time. The longer we stay here, the more exposed we become. Plus, I can't stand the smell here anymore, it's horrible." I continued to whisper to Big D, "Did you see the merchant's attitude? Surely we have found the right place. Otherwise, he wouldn't have such a vigilant attitude." What I just said startled Big D. If it is true that the merchant is the source of the animals for research, then we are exposed. The outcome will be extremely dire. Just as Big D feared, the merchant had doubted our true purpose in coming here. He called the two bodyguards over, seeing how their attitudes were different from when they greeted us. Big D seems to have a sixth sense regarding dangerous things. He immediately shows extreme anxiety. As for me, it's still not certain that they discovered us. My job right now is to play my role properly. So I turned towards the merchant and gave him a big smile.